Hello YouTube. Hi, my name is Mark and this is Nixon Motorsports. This channel is all about motorsports, from racing to exotic cars and even simulators. Hey, so today's video I'm going to talk about the Formula 1000 race car. And you know what? You might find this of interest. Let's get into the video. Come on. So very quickly, this video will get into a few things. And anyone who has interest or curiosity of a Formula 1000 race car, and or a racer who's looking or considering a Formula 1 race car, you know, this video might be of interest to you. I'll get into some of the history of the race car. I'll get into some of the specifics or specs that make a Formula 1000. I'll show you some helmet cam video just so you can see through my eyes what it's like to experience driving one of these race cars. And I'll talk about manufacturers, I'll talk about what series you can race it in, and of course I'll have to walk through and I'll show you some of the components and features that I have on my Formula 1 race car. Okay? So I will show and talk about this race car a little bit later in the video, and by the way, you can see it's all in pieces at the moment. I'll explain later, but let me start with this. So a Formula 1000 race car, I find these race cars awesome, actually. I've raced numerous different types of Formula race cars over the years. I started in karting and I ended up running champ cars. If you know what those are, they're pretty intense. They're dedicated road racing Formula race cars, or used to be. That series is no longer. But I've raced many, and this race car, the Formula 1000, I've had now for the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, I guess it is. And I thoroughly enjoy this particular race car. Now, I'm going to have to get into the what is it and specifics and all of that. But before I do that, let's start with this. Let me take you out on track with my helmet camera on. Let me show you just what it's like to be behind the wheel and drive one of these things. So with that, let's get out on the track and then I'll come back and continue, okay? Come on.
Sorry about that. What's he doing? 1 minute. Okay, Eddie, move.
so that is a quick lap with a helmet camera, right? So I hope that gave you a sense, some kind of a sensation of what it's like to drive these kind of cars. It's hard to express what 3Gs in braking and 3Gs in cornering means unless you've been able to drive a car that can actually do that, right? So what I'd like to do next, I'm going to break away before I show you the components of my particular F1000. And let me get on the computer here, and I'm going to break away. I'm going to talk about the history a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about the basic specifications for a Formula 1000. All right, so let's break away on the computer and look at that. Okay, let's talk about Formula 1000 history and basic specifications of the Formula 1000 car itself. These cars first came into the market about 2006, 2007. And it's funny, I think back about this, and I tell the story many times, but I think back about 2006 or so, when I first saw one of these cars, and you can see this kind of original looking store F1000 here in the top of this display. But I remember seeing that car on a racetrack when I was running Toyota Atlantics back around that time period. And I remember seeing that, and I walk up to it, and I thought, wow, that's a pretty awesome looking car. What the heck is this thing? And anyway, I walk up to it, and first thing I see when I look around the car, I see this chain. So it was a chain-driven race car, and I thought to myself, okay, wait a minute, that's screwy. That's not a race car, right? And then I walk around, and I look inside the cockpit, and I see it's a tubular chassis. So it was not a carbon monochrome itself, and I thought, that's not a race car. I tell you this story because all these years later, of course, I'm racing Formula 1000 now. I am so past that. These cars are freaking awesome. Excuse my language, but they're really intense race cars, and I enjoy racing these things. So just wanted to share that little bit of a piece. But Lee Storr and Wayne Felch first introduced the F1000. They say formally in 2007. My base chassis of my race car, by the way, is a 2007. But later they sold that, the store, to Dauntless Racing. I believe it was 2014. So ever since 2014, Dauntless Racing's been the OEM, or the manufacturer, for the store F1000. And there are other manufacturers as well. And later in this video, I'll get into that, okay? Basic history, though, outside of 2007, 2006 or so, it really stemmed from the fact that racers got together and basically had the idea of, these superbike engines are insane. These motors are producing a tremendous amount of power output for their size. And it didn't take a whole lot to figure out that, wow, if you could take this superbike engine technology and drop that into a race car, that this might be a pretty good combination. And the F1000 itself really gets its name from really two things. It's a 1,000cc motorcycle engine, or a 1 liter normally aspirated motorcycle engine, right? With 1,000 pounds minimum weight. And the 1,000 pounds is wet. So that's car, driver, fluids, fuels, that type of thing. And that really is what it stems from. And now these cars were originally priced at around $40,000 to $75,000 brand new. And that's actually very, very good if you think about that. And many of you who have race cars or have in the past know that that's a pretty good price point for a brand new race car. And the other thing I thought was interesting, just from a kind of a history point of view, is SCCA stepped in, and they actually
really got behind the F1000, and they allow, and still do today, people who have race cars, you know, that want to convert them to run in the F1000 class, they can do that. And they allow conversion of other Formula race cars, like a Formula Continental, and convert that to be legal to run in the F1000 class. So I find that pretty interesting. You know, specifications, I'm not going to go into all the detail. If you are interested in the F1000 specifications, you would need to go pull up the GCR in you know, SCCA or whatever series you're going to run. Typically, many, if not all, will point to the SCCA GCR, but just for your reference. So, you know, as I talked about just a moment ago, basic specifications of the F1000. Normally aspirated 1000cc motorcycle engine. There are no limitations as far as what manufacturer, so you could use, you know, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki, whatever you want, whatever year you want to run, that is legal. Now, as I talked about a moment ago in the history, the car has a minimum weight of 1,000 pounds. Technically, with rule changes over the years, it's 1025 if you're paddle shifting, which most F1000 cars are these days. So it's 1025 technically minimum weight. Now the wheelbase, 99 inches, front track 64, rear track 61 inches. That's a pretty standard dimension. The wheels are 13-inch center lock. There's no 15-inch, you know, no other sizes. And you have a maximum tire width of 10 inches, and you could run any tire manufacturer of choice. You could run bias ply, radials, Hoosiers, Avons, Goodyears, whatever. But you have a maximum 10-inch width tire tread itself. So that's a key point. Now braking, you do have to run symmetrical braking front and rear of the car. So you can have up to 4 piston calipers, and that's pretty standard on most of the cars these days. These are dual wishbone pushrod suspension. I haven't seen any pull rod suspension, though there may be one out there. But pushrod suspension and motion ratios typically are going to be a 1-to-1 motion ratio. I have seen a point, I think, 9:2-to-1 ratio, and I'm talking about the rocker and suspension movement itself. Now the chassis are space frame, a tubular steel chassis. These are not a carbon car. In fact, carbon fiber is not allowed purely from a cost point of view, but there is one exception to that. The front nose of the race car, it's a crash structure, so it's a safety item. That can be carbon fiber, and as far as I know, all of the F1000's nose is a carbon fiber piece. Quick performance numbers. The F1000 can reach top speeds about 170 miles an hour or 274 kilometers per hour. It's a decent speed. Where these things really shine is in the braking and the cornering performance. Quite honestly, 3Gs, which is what these cars do or more, is pretty serious. Look, it's not F1, right, where they're in the 5G, 6G range. It's not that. But again, many of you who have race cars know, you know, 3Gs is actually substantial, and very few cars are able to achieve 3Gs in cornering and braking. So that's where these cars really shine. Now they are a winged car, they are a flat bottom, but they produce in excess of 1,000 pounds of downforce at speed, right? So when the car is at its top speed, 1,000 pounds of downforce is reached for these things. All right, so I hope the history, I hope the basic specs or specifications for the F1000 helped a little bit to try to understand what these cars are. Let's do this. I'm going to walk around, I'm going to show and talk about the different components, pieces that I have on my F1000. And let me start with this. It is a Store race car, and Store is one of the manufacturers. I'll get into that later in the video. It's a 2007 chassis, and very few parts on this race car are original. So as I walk around and talk and show you things, let me just call out what is original. So the space frame itself, the basic steel tubular chassis, the skeleton, if you want to think of it that way, that is original equipment, with the exception the rear end of the car, what's called the spar, that is custom and upgraded. But the basic chassis, the metal structure is the same. I use OEM A-arms suspension components, so the A-arms and the uprights are original Store equipment, okay? Everything else is different, okay? Just so you can think of that as we walk through it. So my race car, it is a Formula 1000. It's legal to run in the SCCA US majors, and again, I'll talk about where you can race in different series later in this video as well. Just quickly, performance on my race car. So I have 223 horsepower at 14,000 RPM, and I exceed or at least reach 3 Gs in braking, 3 Gs in lateral cornering. The car produces about 1,100 pounds of downforce at speed, and I'm referring to at top speed, not at your low speed parts of the track, of course. And it's 1,000 pounds. Actually, I have to run 1,025. Again, I'll explain a little bit of that later. So my minimum weight is 1,025 pounds. Now that's with driver, with fuel. So my minimum when I come in post-race, post-qualifying, whatever not, I have to be at or above 1,025 pounds. So if you do some quick math, 1,025 pounds, 223, 224 horsepower, not too shabby, right? Now, a lot of people ask, what's the top speed? How fast can you go? The fastest I've had my race car, well, let me back up. It depends on the racetrack that you're running on. So for an example, if you're on Daytona or some modified oval, very high speed track, minimal cornering, you're going to run the car more trimmed out, less wing, less downforce, make it, I'll call it more slippery, right? At those racetracks, you're going to run a lot higher speeds. I don't run on those tracks. I like the aggressive road race courses myself, but I've heard of individuals being able to get their cars up to about 165, close to 170 top speed, miles an hour, that is. And so in theory, that's the top limit, roughly. I've only seen at the mid to upper 150s myself. So I would say about a 160 mile an hour is probably a pretty good top speed for these cars. Okay, so let me walk around and talk about my Formula 1000 itself. Now, as you look at this, you're going to go, it doesn't look like a race car. That's because it's in pieces at the moment. I'm actually doing a big body kit upgrade. I'm transforming the race car with the entire exterior body and all the panels. So engine covers, floors,
wings and so on. So that's why it's in pieces. And actually, that's another example of how I spoke earlier about one of the things I love, where you can continuously develop and upgrade these cars, right? Let's start with this. The basic chassis itself. Now, this is not a monochrome carbon fiber tub or chassis. And what I mean by that, modern Formula race cars and some other sports car classes, they build their entire core structure out of a one-piece one-piece carbon fiber structure, and they call it a carbon monochrome. It's a safety cell, it's extremely strong, and so on. This is not that, right? This is what's called a space frame. You know, if I just roll down in here and kind of point this out, this is a tubular chassis, metal frame that the race car is built upon, right? So think of it as the skeleton and the core structure of the race car. It is a metal chassis itself, okay? Now, let's focus over on suspension for a minute. The suspension on this race car, it's called the double wishbone. You have an upper and a lower A-frame that's part of your corner, and this is a push rod suspension. So you have a shock, a dampener up here, you have a rocker, and then you have this push rod that actually keeps the corner in position, right? So as load decreases happens, it actually moves that force through this push rod all the way up into the dampener itself. So pretty simple design. It's a very common design. There's one of the front. Here's one of the rear sides itself. Very, very similar. Some of the A-arms are interchangeable. Some are specific to the corner itself. Now, in my race car, I run such low ride height. I actually have a heave spring up front. So this is, or a third spring if you want to call it that. So this is a custom add-on. This third spring is used to help control the bottom of the race car hitting the track. And I do that for heavy braking primarily. And you're able to adjust its position where this actually comes into play by this gap right here. And then I have different, I call it just pucks, that I can use in here as well. I don't put a spring in here specifically, but for an example, this first puck is just a piece of nylon. It does not compress at all. It's not springy, but this blue piece of rubber does have some compliance, and it does give a little bit of a spring-like feature on this third spring. But that's what that is. So I use third springs on the race car. Now, let's talk about the dampeners or shocks. I use the Olin shocks. These are the TTX 40s, a very, very common, very, I would say, upper end dampener itself. You have a ton of compression and rebound adjustability, both high and low speed. That's what these rubber caps are. If I took one off here, let me show you. There you can see. So inside here you have an outer and an inner nut that you're able to adjust, and they basically have 40 clicks in left or right orientation. But that's what I use. So I use the Olin TTX 40s, and from a spring point of view, I use whatever I have handy. I typically run 4-inch. 2 1/4, I think they are, springs. I can run up to 5-inch springs if I want. And I believe these rear ones are 5-inch length. Now you can't quite see it here. Well, you kind of can. So I have sway bars on my race car. So from my front rockers, you see this apparatus here and this rod itself. That, you can't see the front one, but it goes all the way up under the front where I have a sway bar.
Now let's go to the rear of the car. I also have sway bars here in the rear. So here's an example of my sway bar in the rear of the race car, and here's your blades. And it's very similar to the front, but the front I have one blade. In the rear I have two smaller blades. The way this works is depending on the orientation of these blades, you're able to change the stiffness. You're able to add physical spring rate to the race car itself. And that's what these are. So same like the front, you have connection to the push rod and to each corner itself. So in the Formula 1000, you have to run 13-inch wheels. We have a limit of 10-inch wide, but you can run as narrow or as wide as you want, as long as you don't exceed 10 inches. So here I have a handful of sets kind of laying around. Here's a brand new set mounted with stickers. Here's one of the fronts. This is an Avon. This is a 13-inch wheel. And on the front, this particular tire is a 7-inch width front. And down here on the bottom, these are 8.2-inch rears that I run. I have wider sets. So here I have 8-inch fronts and I have 10-inch rears that I run as well. So it's really depends on the track. It depends on all sorts of preferences, quite honestly. And performance, but 13-inch wheels is required. You can use either magnesium wheels or split aluminum wheel, which is what I use, and you know, that's really it on the wheel tire side. Actually, before I forget this, just like I talk about how everything's so open in this class, the Formula 1000, I could run any tire that I choose. We don't have any manufacturer requirements on tires. We don't have any compound tire requirements at all, so I can run as hard or as soft. I can run radial or bias ply, you know, so it's wide open. It's another thing I love. All right, so let's pan over here and talk about this guy. What is that? Well, this is my engine. It is a 2022 ZX10R motor, and fresh from dyno. It's a brand new motor. This motor does have dry sump. In fact, I run dry sump on all of my engines. But it's a 2022. It has a few enhancements to it from a performance point of view, but it's stock OEM, drive-by-wire throttle bodies. It does have a custom airbox, which you see here in the gold heat reflective material. And with the dry sump on it, you can sort of see how low it sits to the pan down here. It brings the engine down quite low. So this is the engine that I run, but just a few things that I'll call out here. So I run 4-into-1 headers, which you see here, and these are wrapped in Nixon, which is kind of a space age material. It's a heat barrier. I use a hydraulic clutch assembly, so that's what this little guy is. Many racers will just use a cable and have a cable control on their steering wheel for the clutch. I have a 3-pedal assembly. I like the clutch on my left foot. I have plenty of room, so that's what I did here. This is my oil tank for the dry sump system itself. You have a return kind of a vent here at the top, and then this big 12AN line here, this is actually return oil from the sump itself back into the tank. It holds, with, well, depending on the size of the oil cooler, anywhere from 9 to about 12 quarts of oil. Let me spin over here, show you this side again. You can tell everything's apart, that's fine. I do use electric water pump because in my dry sump setup, you have to convert the engine to electric pump itself. I do use an external water thermostat. You don't have to. You could use the OEM one that's in the head itself. I do that simply. I like the bypass feature, and I could change out my thermostat to different temperature thermostats, very, very easily. So that's why I have that here. If you look down here, if you can see this, this is an actuator, it's called. This is what actually controls the shifting of the engine. Now, this race car is paddle shift. It does have high pressure air in the race car. And this block here, it's called just an air block assembly or pneumatic air block. This is the control from electronic feature to pneumatic feature, where it actually will turn on or off the different pressures for the actuator to control your shifts itself. While I'm here at the rear of the car, talk about the differential. You can't really see it much. It's actually down inside there, but it sits in this cradle here in the rear of the race car, and this section is called the spar. It simply bolts up to the back of the chassis and to the back of the engine, and it actually has all your mount points for your A-arms, your suspension. It has your differential here, and that's adjustable, so you can move this forward or backwards to adjust your chain. And like every motorcycle engine, it is chain driven, so this is where you control your gear ratios, or excuse me, your major gear ratio. So you have a counter sprocket and a rear, but all the gears inside your gearbox are fixed. You could change them if you wanted to, but all we do is just change this, your primary or secondary sprocket for gear changes. So like I said, it is a paddle shift system. If you can see right here by my finger and hear it, that's actually the upshift on the steering wheel itself. And so that's how you actually shift. You have an upshift, and then on this side you have a downshift. For anybody who's driven or has sims, it's very similar. A lot of sims are paddle shift, same thing. All right, so next let's talk about the electronics in this race car. So I run Motec, pretty much everything. And for those of you who do not know, Motec is one of several data acquisition companies. They're in the professional class or category, if you will. So they're not the lower end, but their features are extremely strong and really rich. I converted this race car. In fact, I have some other videos on that a couple years back. Primarily, the reason I converted was I used to run the OEM or the bike engine ECU, and for the most part that works. You're able to flash it. You're able to change the ignition map, the fuel map, that kind of thing. But it's somewhat of a black box. There are trim tables and things within the OEM ECU that your flashing tools just don't give you access to. So I was irritated with that over time, and so I converted to Motec, and I use the Motec 150, the M150. It's their new generation ECUs in the race car. And I run drive-by-wire, so all of the driver input, throttle body control is through the ECU itself, so it's a drive-by-wire setup. I use the embedded pneumatic shifting capability within my ECU, so there's no control module like you used to have to do for paddle shifting. All of that is controlled directly by the ECU itself. One of the major benefits outside of those, and those are pretty cool, it's a closed loop lambda, and if you don't know what that is, open loop lambda, like a lot of bikes actually use, they'll have O2 sensors just from a logging point of view, but they didn't do any corrective action. So closed loop lambda means you have a O2 sensor in your exhaust system, or more than one. I actually run two of them, and your ECU is monitoring your air-fuel ratio real time. And it's making corrective changes to keep your AFR or lambda at that target that you've set it for. So if ambient conditions are different, if you're running you know, either higher altitude or lower altitude, you know, all of those things change your fuel. And so one of the huge benefits is with the Motec 150 ECU, I have closed loop lambda, I have zero need to do anything. It keeps it right on the money. So that's pretty cool. Now I would show you some of the parts. Well, let's see. Actually, now I can't even get to, well, here. I can sort of get down here. You can kind of see M150 in the belly there. That's about it. I use, from a logger point of view, I use a Motec L180. That's a 180. It's a pretty high-end logger. It's got a billion channels. It's got very high frequency logging capability, telemetry support, all of those types of things. So I use the L180 logger. I use the Motec PDM, and that's a solid state module that controls all of your devices in your electrical system, right? So fuel pump control, you know, water pumps, you know, power for all your sensors, power for your coils, on and on and on. What's really trick about the PDM is that it's also sitting on my CAN bus for the race car, and I'm virtually logging and have alarms for everything around current consumption for every device, you know, voltage and that type of thing. I also use a external GPS module that is in the Motec family. It's actually one of the race grade products. Let me back up. Virtually every data acquisition system will have GPS support, and the majority of them use more, I'll call it commercial grade GPS receivers, and they're typically 10 hertz. And 10 hertz is basically for every second you would have basically 10 values received from satellite, right? So if you think about that for a minute, okay, it doesn't sound that big a deal. Well, think about it from a race car point of view, and why do you have the GPS? Well, it gives you position, it creates track maps, it knows your location, your lat longs, and so on. And the positions part of it, but also from a lap time point of view or corner speeds, whatever you're looking at, the more accurate the GPS is, the better. And let me just call it out this way. So think of it this way: for every 1 mile an hour, 1 mile an hour is 1.46 feet per second, right? So if you think of that, you're on the racetrack as well, and somebody's pulling away from you at just 1 mile an hour faster than you. That's 1.46 feet every second, and that's a lot. That's just 1 mile an hour. So take 100 miles an hour, that's 146 feet per second. 150 miles an hour, what is that? 220 feet per second. All right, so why am I mentioning that? Well, if you have a 10 hertz GPS receiver, it's only sampling at 10 times a second. And the faster you go, the less accurate you will have in position. Does that make sense? So anyway, with all that chat, I run a 20 hertz GPS receiver. So this is my guy that I use here. And this is considered a pretty high-end receiver itself, but I stepped this thing up to 20 hertz itself. So while I'm up here and pointing at things, I'll stop here and talk about this. So what is this and why do I have it? So this is actually a router. It's actually a hotspot. So my race car, I use a hotspot that's fixed in the race car. This provides two things: internet connectivity for the race car at all times. It also provides a local network for the race car. And so Motec and some other loggers use Ethernet connectivity. So these different Ethernet connections actually are from different devices like the ECU, the logger, and that type of thing. It allows me to have Wi-Fi connection in the pits, in the garage, from any local connectivity point within range of Wi-Fi, where I can actually connect to the race car, and I can monitor, I could make changes, I can do whatever I want. The second part, think of it, you know, when you roll in from a session, you're on track, you want to download your data, you don't have to plug in anything to the race car, though I do frequently, but you don't have to. You could roll in, you're connected on its Wi-Fi, you download data, so it's pretty cool. So from a dash point of view, I do use Motec. This is a D153 display module itself, and then I use one of their SLMs. They're programmable lights here as well. These are multicolor lights. So this is not a Motec wheel. It's basically built and assembled for my use, but I am using the Motec display and the LED control module, okay? So if I pan down here, you can't see it very well, but I use a Tilton 900 series pedal assembly, a 3-pedal assembly. These are very trick pedals, very light. They have a nice bearing mount for the master cylinders. I have a video on this specifically. If you want to go back and look, you can find my installation and a lot more detail on that, but that's the pedal assembly I use. So let me roll around and show you the wings that I'm using on the race car. So here's my latest front wing that I'm using. I have not had it on the track to see what it's like yet. Looks pretty trick. Apparently it's much more efficient than what I've been running. So that's my front wing that I use, and these are all custom. These are available through other aftermarket manufacturers, by the way, for the F1000. If I roll to the back of the car, you can see the rear wing. So it's a dual upper element. So you have adjustability on the lower main, you have adjustability here on the top, and its secondary element. So a lot of adjustability on this rear wing setup. So I really like this. Been using these now for a couple years, I think, roughly. So let me talk about some of the sensors that I use on my race car. Not going to spend a lot of time on that as to the why and so on. Outside of your standard sensors, right? I mean, the thing pretty much everybody's going to have, right? From you know, engine RPM to gear position, right? Oil pressure and so on. So I'm not going to talk about all of that standard stuff, but let me talk about the sensors that I use on this race car that are, I would say, probably somewhat unique. So first of all, strain gauge. So I have on each corner of the load cell, I have a strain gauge sensor, and these are actually measuring the force on each corner of the race car. So I can actually measure basically downforce very accurately. I also have a track surface temperature sensor, and I'm not quite sure if I can get to it here, but this little guy down here, you can't see much, but it tracks surface temperature. I have water pressure, I have fuel temperature, I have inside and outside 16-channel tire temps and pressures, and you know, the dual closed loop lambda, I talked about that briefly, but here's two of the sensors right there. And I also have shock position sensors. Now, a lot of people will run these, but I have these on the race car as well. So that's kind of a walkthrough and just a discussion on my particular F1000. You know, and again, it's all in pieces. You know, one of the big upgrades I'm doing currently is a brand new body structure or kit. And the reason I'm doing that, I'm trying to make the car a little more efficient.
so it doesn't punch such a large hole through the air. So air inlet, this piece is down dramatically. It's a lot lower. The side pods, which are not here yet, are a lot smaller profile, that type of thing. And it's a weight saving. So that's just another example. Let me answer this, because a lot of people ask, well, how much money does it cost, you know, to buy a car like what you have, that kind of thing. And I'll talk about here later in the video, you know, different manufacturers that you can look at and some of the newer costs and so on. But to answer that question for this race car, I purchased it used about, I think, 6-7 years ago. I purchased it for, I think it was 35 or 39,000, something like that. And I haven't tabulated the math, but I can tell you easily well over 100,000. You know, just my Motec electronics, all my sensors and everything, you know, that's well in the 40,000 range itself. So yeah, easily that kind of monetary amount at least invested in the car, okay? Okay, so next up, I'm gonna talk about racing, the Formula 1000, where you can race the car. I'm going to get into some of the manufacturers, who produces the Formula 1000 race cars. I'll talk about where you might be able to purchase or find a Formula 1000, and then I'll wrap this up with a couple comments just on my view. You know, is a Formula 1000 the car that you should consider? So let's get into this discussion. Now, racing series in the United States, the Formula 1000 can be raced in the SCCA series. They've combined that with the Formula Atlantic class, but previously there was enough numbers and quantity of the F1000. It had a class designator of FB, so, you know, Frank Baker used to be the class for F1000. So it had its own dedicated class, both, you know, regional level and the national level series, which these days is called the US Majors. Numbers, though, unfortunately shrank a little bit, and SCCA is very particular about that. Car classes have to be a certain size in quantity for a particular car class to remain standalone by itself. So Formula Atlantic now is kind of a catch-all for a couple different racing cars that have been around for a while, and so the F1000 actually races in the FA class these days. Now, the positive still for those of you here in the United States, SCCA national level, so the US Majors and the F1000 running in the Formula Atlantic class, you can compete and go to the national runoffs. And this is the annual championship that SCCA does every year, and those venues rotate around various different tracks around the country, and it's a pretty cool thing. So a lot of competition, and people, pretty much the best in the regions around the nation, flock to the runoffs, and pretty cool thing. And you know, just sharing a little bit from my own experience, I think about the places that I've been to the runoffs now a handful of times over the years, and I think about my first runoffs was 2000. I think it was 2005, and I was running a Swift 08. It was a Toyota Atlantic, and the runoffs was in Mid-Ohio, and I raced against Graham Rahal as an example during that race, and Graham was competing there. Actually, he won that race. The Rahals, this is their home track, if you will. He did quite good, quite well. And anyway, just a reflection, a story point. But I've raced at Indianapolis Motor Speedway,
I've raced at Sears Point or Infineon Raceway in runoffs and a couple more from there. So that's just the United States. Now, there's a few racing series that are no longer, and I show here this defunct F1000 racing series. So you had a Formula 1000 championship. It was called this membership championship thing that started around 2007 and fizzled out a couple years past that. And then you had the F1000 Pro Series, mostly a West Coast thing, and then this U.S. Formula 1000 Championship. It's another series that no longer is. Now there are professional level series as well. So really only two that I'm aware of, and if I've missed one, please send me a comment on that. But in Australia, they've been running the Formula 1000 Pro event for quite a few years now, and many of the F1000 cars actually are in Australia for that reason. It's televised. I mean, it's quite the thing apparently in Australia. So they call it the Australian Formula 1000 series itself. In the United States, there is the North American Formula 1000 Championship, so that is active, and a handful of racers, some that I know actually race in that. If you run in the North America Championship, it's the same rules as the GCR in SCCA, so they just piggyback on the SCCA rules itself for that race series. Now, talking about manufacturers, so this might not be a complete list. There could be more. If we start with the top, so if you recall a moment ago, I talked about SCCA and their rules. They've always supported conversion of previous race cars, like the Formula Continentals, where they could be converted to run in the F1000 class. And this just shows a couple that I'm aware of. So a Citation, the Van Diemen, the Piper. Those are a couple examples that I've seen that have been converted to an F1000. Now, purpose-built F1000, this, I believe, is the majority of the manufacturers out there. So the very first one is a JDR. Then you have Philadelphia Motorsports. You have a Phoenix. You have Racing Concepts, or they call it, the Spreads car. The Furman, or the Ralph Furman racing car. SSR Engineering, which I've never seen one, quite honestly. And then the Store F1000, which is the car that I run, actually. Okay? So I'll talk a little bit about the manufacturers, show you a couple photos here of what those cars may or may not look like. And the first one up here is the JDR. So these are a very capable, fast car. In fact, this top one here this top one to the right is one that Alex Mayer raced for a number of years. I think he's got multiple different championships in that particular race car. So in his hands, it's a very quick race car. Here's the URL, the web link for JDR on the top. Here's some of the pricing that I pulled up from their website. So you can see it's about $75,000 for a brand new car. And I believe they are still manufacturing these, and they are for sale, just for your reference. But they are a very light car. I know from a weight point of view, they have an advantage over others. So you could think of that as well. Myself personally, I'm not a huge fan of the JDR, and it's not from a performance point of view. So those of you out here or listening to this who have a JDR, plug your ears for a second. But I just, Visually, I don't think they're that appealing, but that's just my preference. It's nothing more than that. Next up is the store, and this top white picture here, you can see the original store, kind of their initial launch car that they used. Decent race car, a handful of them out there. In fact, I heard, I believe they produced over 130 of the store cars themselves, so in that range. You can see the URL for the website here if you want to go look at that. There are many variations of the store, so if you look at the photos here to the lower left side of the display, first you can see the red one. That's my my F1000 itself, and then to the top right of that, that's another store. That's a kind of a newer generation body kit on the basic race car itself. So, but the stores have a certain look. They have a lot of similarities, but you can find all kinds of different body kits and different pieces and wings and such that are part of the store itself. So there's a good supply. There's a good supply of aftermarket parts for the store race car. Next up, the Furman. The Furman race car, and there's the website link for it as well. These are a pretty competitive race car. Now, I'm not absolutely sure if they are still building these any longer. You would have to go talk to them specifically. But here's a couple examples of some photos of the Furman. Now, the top right one that I'm showing you here, that car actually is for sale. I don't have any affiliation here at all. That car's for sale. I've raced against it. It's a very quick, very well sorted car. So for anyone who wanted a very high-end F1000, that is available. So send me a comment if you have any interest. I can put you in contact with who has that. Again, I don't know if Furman, though, is still making these cars or not. You would have to do the research yourself on that. Next up is the Phoenix, and the Phoenix is a very capable car. Now, I've seen these up close in person. I've raced against them, just like the Furmans and the JDRs. In fact, this particular car won the 2018 championship, the runoffs itself, so it's a very capable car. As far as I know, that there was only 2 of these built, so they basically are, it's a prototype, a one-off, and as far as I know, there's 0 production. There's no capability of purchasing new Phoenix race cars. So next up, where should you look if you have interest in a Formula 1000? There's not a lot of them on the market, I will tell you. If you have interest, you're going to have to keep your eyes on glass, on your computer. You're going to have to talk to people. You're going to have to keep looking, because once they come up on the market, typically they sell very, very quickly. But here's a couple places you could look. So Apex Speed, they have great forums. They have a forum on Apex Speed just for Formula 1000. So that's a good place you might want to look at. And I show you here a picture of Apex Speed, their website. That's all that is. Another one is Race Cars Direct. You can purchase race cars from all types, right? Sports cars, open wheel, etc., all over the world. So that's pretty cool. In fact, the top right picture here, there's that Furman that I mentioned a moment ago that I know is for sale at the moment. And that car's listed on the Race Car Direct website as well. As far as I know, though, so outside of used, from a new point of view, there's not a lot of choices. So JDR, I do believe they are still producing are manufacturing JDR race cars. So you could go to JDR and probably purchase one. Now now in the Dauntless Racing category, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. They are taking orders, or they would take an order for a race car. I would just say be very, very careful. Their business has been pretty rocky over the last couple years. So getting parts and pieces from them specifically can be a problem. I personally haven't had an issue, but if you're going to go to them and purchase a new race car, make sure you have strong hooks in your contract in doing so. So I'm just giving you a beware. And that kind of goes true with any of the others, right? So I don't know status of the others. Are they manufacturing? Will they take your money? Will they build you a car? You would need to sort that out yourself. My recommendation, the best thing for you to do, just from a dollar spend point of view, if you can find a used F1000, I personally wouldn't do a conversion. I wouldn't purchase a conversion. I would go for a purpose-built F1000 car. That's what you want. And you could always modify, enhance, develop it to whatever interests you have. But that's probably the best place to go. So let me talk about, is a Formula 1000 race car something that's right for you? If you're watching this video to this point, you're probably thinking or asking those questions of yourself. So let me start with this. Look, the Formula 1000, it's a very capable race car. And if you think of it just from a performance point of view, from a lateral force of 3 Gs or more in cornering and braking, that's a lot actually. So the second part I think I would say is the Formula Atlantic race series itself in amateur racing, it's the highest level of race car performance there is. So I'm saying all that not to try to discourage you. The Formula 1000 race car should be probably in the hands of a driver who has some driving experience. So that doesn't mean, I'm discouraging you, don't go buy one of these things if you don't have that kind of experience. What I would say to you though, if the Formula 1000 race car is something that you're just absolutely seeking, and you're a young or inexperienced driver, make sure you spend the time, proper seat time, proper driving schools if you can. Racing schools are always a good thing to look at. But I would recommend not to purchase one immediately and find yourself in a race weekend short period thereafter. You need a little seat time in these things to get to terms with them. Okay, so just think of that. Now, from a cost point of view, there are some Formula Atlantics that are more expensive than others. So, for an example, the Toyota Atlantics themselves, with the 4AG motors, or the 08s, 014s, or the newer 16s, you can spend some money on those. In theory, the F1000 is a little more economical, but I would say from a cost per mile point of view, the F1000, if you're going to be running at the top level, competitive level itself, you're going to spend money on it, right? You'll go through a couple motors a year. Obviously, tires are an obvious. You'll go through tires like crazy. So think of that. It's not out of reach, but it's not just put gas or fuel in your car and drive, and that's it. It's definitely more than that. Hey, so let me kind of wrap up this way. You know, the F1000, I love it. Of all the race cars I've had over the years, I really enjoy this thing. Being the fact that it's a race car and a class that allows you to constantly develop, improve, seek additional performance, that type of thing. I really enjoy that. So hopefully you picked up some of that on this video. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I appreciate that. There'll be another video out shortly. As you can tell through parts of this video, I'm doing this new body kit on the race car. So there'll be a video on that. I'll show you all the steps, everything I had to do on that. I do have a race, a doubleheader, US Majors coming up in just a few weeks actually. So I'll bring you along on that as well. But I appreciate you watching, and come on, if you haven't subscribed, hit that button, will you? I would really appreciate that. Until next time, okay? Ciao.